Hello everyone, I'm Paul. I'm a mental health nurse. Currently I work as a mental health nurse consultant in a mental health crisis team in Northumberland. I'm also a psychological therapist, predominantly in CBT, but I do have other kind of therapeutic modes that I use. And I'm also a leadership coach in the NHS. I'm here today to talk to you about what contributes to pure mental health. Now, the fact that you're here and you're alive would tell me that you know a little bit about that, because generally that's what life is like, and you just get thrown sometimes whatever it is you have to deal with. We're going to look at a model specifically about how we understand it and whether that relates to us as individuals. I've given you a pack with some handouts, and the first thing you need is the picture of the stress bucket, and I'm hoping that there's enough pens here so that you can fill that out as we go, so you can get to understand a little bit about you, about kind of mental health as a concept. Now, in no way am I suggesting that you're all sat here with mental health problems. That's not what I'm saying. But just understanding what comes along in life that would contribute to someone developing some mental health problems. It might be that you haven't got a particular diagnosable condition, but you have a set of symptoms. It might be very clear that the reason for these symptoms is because of something else. One of the pieces of work that I do a lot of is about the mind-body connection, and thinking about what does our body function like, what purpose is it serving, what messages do we get that we sometimes notice or don't, and what does that then mean for our mental health. So I'm hoping that theme will come through. I'm hoping it's relevant to this group, and I'm hoping you will kind of guide me on that by your engagement and by kind of filling in some of the tools and stuff. If you've got any questions as we go, feel free to shout out. I haven't rehearsed this, so I've got no idea how long it's going to take. I speak fast anyway, so if I get quicker, it's because I know I'm running out of time and I'm nowhere near the end.
You just have to talk over them.
Coming from you?
Yeah.
Alright then, yeah, we'll have a competition. So I think I've already said a little bit about the aims, but basically it's to look at the concept of what stress vulnerability model is and the bucket analogy. So it's two different models that do the same thing. Understanding what contributes to pure mental health and how we link that to ourselves. I've put in there thinking about where perimenopause or menopause or post-menopause fits, but that's for you guys to think about when we complete some of the work that we're going to complete together. That's not for me to tell you. And then we will explore and practice some of the therapeutic techniques that I use with patients on a day-to-day basis in my day job as a nurse, but also as a therapist in my private practice. So this model is a really fundamental model in how we think about the onset of mental illness. The stress vulnerability model, as it says there, is from 1977, and it was a model used to describe how somebody might experience the onset of psychosis or a psychotic type disorder. And again, that's at the kind of the far edge of mental health problems, and it's one of the more critical conditions and the more difficult to treat. The model, however, is very versatile, and I think the elements of the model and how it allows us to think about our experiences and how that leads us to develop mental health problems is relevant here, but also relevant to the stress bucket, and we'll move on to that. This model particularly, if someone is high in vulnerability, so that's thinking about things that make us vulnerable, have we had adverse childhood experiences, did we have to kind of rally for love as a child, were we bullied at school, or anything else that might have gone on. Those things, if they happen to us in childhood, they potentially make us vulnerable to developing problems in later life. So this is measured here on a scale, and stress is current state, so what's going on now that's really affecting us. If we've got vulnerability that's high and we've got increased stress, the chances are you're going to slip out of wellness and into illness, not specifically psychosis, but just the applicability of what those symptoms look like and how we manage that. So again, I've kind of touched on that. The experiences or changes in mental health or mental well-being often feel strange and can be frightening, and that's whether you've got a diagnosed condition or every now and again you wake up and you feel anxious, or you have a few nights of poor sleep and you realise that actually I'm in my head a lot and I'm ruminating and I don't know where that's coming from. If that happens for a prolonged period of time, that can become problematic for somebody, and some of those symptoms can spill in. Often it can be around thinking, mood, our emotional well-being, and also can change and affect our behaviours. Rarely in a mental health presentation does it just affect one of those things. Generally, you'll find if you've got symptoms, it's in all of those areas. So the tools here are designed to help us think about ourselves in those 4 parts, but put it all together to really demonstrate this is what's going on for me right now and this is how it fits. And the overflow bucket you've all got a copy of is one of those ways of thinking about it. And again, I think I've clarified, I'm not going to sit here and say, you know, I'm offering you all assessment to see whether it's a psychotic or not, because that's not the case. It's about applicability and no symptoms set.
I think we all identify with psychotic.
Only at points though, I'm sure. Yeah, or the temperature outside. Yeah. So I use this model with any patient that I've got in front of me, and I don't focus on diagnosis. I don't particularly care what the diagnosis is. I think about what their experiences are, what they tell me their symptoms are, and I focus specifically on all aspects of the model and their kind of stresses. And I work very much in a stress formulation rather than an illness formulation, because that's how you get people on board, and that makes sense to people more than thinking specifically about diagnostic criteria, diagnosis and such like. So vulnerability, the bucket essentially is us. So as an individual, if we were to consider ourselves a bucket, an instrument which has a particular capacity to take on board other stuff, some of which we might have control over, but a lot of it we don't, and it just keeps on coming. So someone earlier said, I need a bigger bucket. So we don't get to choose the size of the bucket, that's down to the hand that you dealt. So thinking about the model, if we think about that model from before, someone with high vulnerability and high stress is already at a deficit to have a small bucket, because their ability to cope is going to be less than someone who is less vulnerable and isn't as stressed. It's not as clear cut as that though, because you might be really vulnerable and very stressed, but you might be very, very resilient. So resilience plays a real factor here in how we describe our bucket. As a professional, if I was to meet with you for a one-to-one consultation and do this piece of work, I can't tell you what size bucket you are, that's for you to tell me. Whatever you tell me and we agree to work on will be how the rest of the model falls out of that. And you'll see as we go through the model why that's relevant. So in respect of the bucket analogy then, if we think of stress as water going into the bucket, if you are vulnerable and stressed, the chances are you've got less capacity to deal with that. However, if you're resilient, you can kind of grow your bucket. If you have less vulnerability, less stress and more resilient, you've got a big bucket, which means you've got a big capacity and you can deal more robustly with things as they happen. That's not to say though that it still isn't going to affect you in a particular way, because it will still play a part. Vulnerability factors, I've already mentioned a few, but again, thinking specifically about the job that I do and thinking about mental health and the people that I work with on a day-to-day basis, the things we would screen for and the things that would contribute would be mental illness in the family, so that's that genetic loading, that's about being predisposed. There's a whole argument and debate that's completely separate to this and would need another hour and a half to even debate. Essentially, if you work biopsychosocially with someone, you take into account their biology, their own health, as in physical health, and their family health, and you work with whatever the person's presenting with to then understand why they are presenting the way they're presenting and what factors are influencing that. We look at stress at home, and if you've got a partner, and you've got kids, and you've got pets, then every household is relatively stressful. So that's always relevant. Being bullied when you were younger is relevant, and we see a lot of people coming through saying, well, haven't you had any trauma? I mean, I was bullied at school, and then you explore that, well, I was beaten up on a daily basis, or I was pushed down the stairs, or I was kicked about a bit. They think it hasn't affected them, but it has, because what that does, when it's happening to you at the time, as you develop and grow and evolve as a person, your cognitive self is growing with you based on those experiences. So the view you have of yourself or others or the world around you is probably distorted because those bad things happened. If those things didn't happen, your view would be different, and that's really, really important. So I think it's my job to help people understand that and pick apart, because I was just bullied doesn't mean that that's okay or that there's nothing kind of contributing to your presentation. we focus a lot on abuse as a child, and we all, that could be emotional abuse, it could be physical abuse, it could be sexual abuse. The people that I see, I would argue 80% of those people have had those adversities in their childhood. Now, it is traumatic, but that's not the sole source of trauma in people. That's up to the person to determine whether that was traumatic for them, because your trauma is different to mine, and if we have the same experience, I might well be traumatised by it and you might not be, so there's a relevance there to the individual person. Again, that's where resilience comes into it, and we need to really focus on not just symptoms and deficits, but what makes us resilient and how do we tap into that, because that's ultimately what's going to get us well. Loss of a parent when young, being placed in social care, or being part of a looked after service, we know that has a significant impact on people. Not feeling loved as a child, and again, that's not really something you can nail down. It's very individual. Sometimes parents are doing the best that they can absolutely do. They're trying the hardest to look after the children, and they might demonstrate love with, I don't know, paying the bills, making sure there's food on the table, with material things like a new pair of school shoes so that the child doesn't get bullied, or more presents on their birthday or Christmas because it feels like that's the done thing. What kids need is an emotional kind of love, a sense of fitting in, of belonging, of feeling that the love that they have is safe. There isn't a handbook on parenting, and we don't always get it right. We're always going to have people, as adults, say, I wasn't really loved as a child. That has a massive impact on people, and it is a perception. It doesn't mean that it was right, but that's how they felt, and that's what happened to them growing up. So we have to work with that. Feeling as though you don't fit in. I mean, how many kids these days might you see who, they might be walking to school on their own, or walking home on their own, or if you work in schools, how many sit on their own at break time. I was an anxious and lonely child. That followed me right through high school. Is it a problem now? Yeah, probably, but I don't let people kind of see that. I use it in a positive way to bring about change, to think about how I can support people who have had similar experiences. But a lot of people don't have that growing up. A lot of people don't develop those strategies to learn, and sometimes people just get lost in the system across all facets of their life, and it's really difficult sometimes to unpick that or undo it. And invariably, those people come to me, and sometimes you can't change what's happened. You've kind of got to learn from it and move on. And interestingly, statistically, growing up in an inner city would suggest that those children are more likely to grow up with some vulnerability as an adult. So I've already said stress is the water, and when we're filling in the bucket, and I'm wondering whether you might want to start thinking about your own bucket now. So the water coming in is the stress that we have, that we're consumed by, and depending on how big your bucket is, because I'm hoping you've already started to think about that individually, that's going to determine how much stress is going to go in your bucket, or how much water is going in before it starts to flow over the top. We're going to move into what the flowing out of the top means later on, but it's important to understand each individual stress and the impact of all of those stresses. And like I say, we'll focus on the overflowing bit later on. So again, not an exhaustive list, everyone's individual. I've highlighted in red poor physical health or changes to our health because it's relevant to this group, but it's relevant to everybody because we're all living beings. I've got a recurring back injury, and it was from a stupid accident. I slipped on ice while I was pushing a shopping trolley, and I thought I'd be clever and keep myself at the safe face rather than just going down. Now I thought I'd use my upper body strength to keep myself upright, but actually I hadn't. I'd used my back to do that, and 2 days later I couldn't move. I couldn't get out of bed, and I actually rolled off the bed and crawled, and by the time I got to the door I was able to half stand up. It was like the evolution of my hand, and it was excruciating. I was absolutely terrified. I didn't know what had happened, and it wasn't until I'd suffered the pain for about 4 days that I realised I'd fallen 2 days previously, and it was the stupid trolley's fault. All the ice. That flares up all of this. It was what?
We needed more in each one.
Yeah. So, yeah, it flares up every now and again, and I know that I'm not at my best when my back's sore. I'm agitated, I'm quite ratty, I'm quite disinterested in people sometimes, I don't pay attention, I probably work slower, and that's physically and mentally because I'm preoccupied with the pain that I have. So that's just one symptom. So if you think about your situations and what brings you to this group, and we add that in the bucket on top of life, then we're painting a particular picture of where this might lead for some people. So yeah, you can see there on the list, I don't need to go through them all, but we've all got a life that we're living. On the slides themselves, I've put a bit of the bucket, which this slide's relevant to, just to help you navigate through the form if you do want to fill it in as you go. So things that might help or make it worse. We always talk to patients about, if we can't stop the water coming in, we need somewhere for the water to go. Arguably, drilling holes in the bottom of the bucket probably isn't the best idea anybody's had, but for this model, it's the best idea that we've got. And the idea is the stress and the water might be coming in, but if we can manage it and mitigate some of it by filtering some out, then that means it's not going to get to the point where it's overflowing. It's still stressful, but it's manageable. So the idea of the holes in the bottom of the bucket are thinking about what do we do in our day-to-day to help us cope. How do we get by? How do we get through? What strategies do we have? Now, I'd be lying if I said that this model is going to lead us down the path of positivity and just doing things that are helpful. Like anybody else, if I've had a bad day at work, and I will be having some later on, alcohol, people drink I'm not going to drink excessively, but people drink excessive amounts of alcohol at cope, people might excessively smoke, people might use substances, and sometimes that's all they've got at their disposal because that's all they know and that's all they've ever done. But it gets to a point where actually that's becoming part of the problem, and that's contributing to and maintaining them in illness. So this part of the model looks at the helpful strategies and how we grow those and do more of that. And it also looks at the stuff that we think that we're doing to help ourselves that are actually problematic and contributing to our illness or well-being. So this is a really critical part of the model. And some people need extra help with this bit to really dive into all the things that they do to help themselves, good, bad or indifferent. So things that help to open the holes in the bucket, essentially how do we cope, and I've already mentioned some of them. Some of the ones that we would promote more robustly in mental health services, or if we were providing a wellbeing service, or if I was working with you as a therapist, I would obviously say talk through your problems with someone, because actually that's the first step to acknowledging that you've got a problem or that your problem's not keeping you stuck. Try, even though it's hard, to maintain routine. Engage in the hobbies that you would have routinely if you were well. Even if you're not enjoying them that much or you're not engaging them in the way that you would, at least try and maintain that in some way, shape or form. Stay connected to others, socialise. Sounds really easy, but actually it's not, because when I'm ratty, I don't want to talk to you, and if my back's sore, I'm not feeling sociable, so my go-to would be to go home, shut the door and ignore everything. Or if I'm at work and I'm having a bad day at work because of the back pain, I'd think about how I would kind of preserve that time so that I don't have to be outwardly facing all of the time, because that gets tiring. Getting a good night's sleep, if you can. Again, it sounds really easy, but we know that it's not. We've got so many variables with that. But ultimately, having a routine that would lead you to think, well, I've done everything I can now to get myself in a relaxed state. Thinking about bathing or shower routine, thinking about do I give myself time to actually wind down into sleep, or is it full throttle till 11 o'clock and then it's bed because I've got to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. So working into a routine of sleep. Avoiding TV would be a good strategy. Avoiding caffeine and sugary drinks would be a good strategy. Reading books is useful. I always say to people, don't read a book about your condition before you go to bed, because you'll either dream about it or you'll wake up thinking about it. Read something else. I know so many people who read self-help books before bed. It's not advisable, it's not going to help you. So the routine's really important, and that's going to aid sleep. We can't make anybody sleep, you can't make yourself sleep well, so we've got to think about it. see a professional, have therapy. Not many people want to do that. That doesn't mean you've got to go and declare to someone that you've got this mental health problem that you need some help with. It might just be going to see a GP and saying, this is how I feel, or this is what I'm thinking, or this is what I think is going on, because invariably if you go to your GP, they'll say, what do you think's wrong with you? So just have an idea about what you might need when you get there, because sometimes you don't always get what you need when you go. Again, think about structure. Are you working? Are you exercising? You've got a family to feed when you get home from work. Thinking about that structure and aiming to stick to that, because that routine can be really helpful, even though we might not want to do it, or it feels really kind of onerous and tiring. Maintaining it's really positive. Eat well, stay hydrated. Massively underrated. It's so important. That kind of says what it is really. Take prescribed medication if you're prescribed any, if you feel like you need it, or if it's for the right condition. That's really important. Developing additional strategies and coping strategies can really help, and there are lots of ways in which you can do that. It can be through professionals, through an online source, or through a support group like this one. Because sharing it with people who have been through similar things can be really positive and really helpful. Avoid alcohol and illicit substances, and again, I've already mentioned exercise, even if you don't feel like it, even if it's a walk to your garden gate, or around your garden, or around the kind of the circumference of your house. Something's better than nothing. So this part of the model accounts for the things that we do that think are helpful, or we do because we don't know anything else. And how it works is, fundamentally, once that water comes out of the bucket, because we're trying to cope, it's going right back in. The model calls it maladaptive coping. I don't like that, because sometimes if that's all we've got, that's all we're going to use. One of the themes with that type of coping that we come into contact with in my day job is self-harm. People think, oh my God, someone's self-harming, we've got to stop that, we've got to stop them from doing it, it's really dangerous, it's really maladaptive. Who said? Who said it's maladaptive? Because actually that might be the only thing keeping that person alive. So we've really got to get to know the individual. We've got to really focus in on what's making them tick, what's keeping them going, and working around how do we make them more robust, how do we cushion them so that when they do feel more resilient and they are coping better, that's some of the unhelpful stuff that it can just drop off gradually. If you come to me and that's all you're doing, and I say to you, right, stop doing all of those things, because if you don't, I can't work with you. If you don't stop those things, I can't help you, I'll have to discharge you. What's likely to happen? You're likely to get worse. You might harm yourself if you've never harmed yourself, or worse. So you've got to be really sensitive to what someone's bringing along and why they're bringing it. And if they're open enough to tell you this is what they're doing, then actually they need some praise and some credit for that, because that's really tough to say, all I've got is this, and I don't want you to tell us that I can't do it, because I don't know what I'll be left with. Really, really important. So when I work with people in this model, absolutely no judgment. If you tell me you drink 3 bottles of wine a night, I'm jealous that I'm a bottle behind you. Because sometimes that's just what people need. This side of the model, this is the side that depicts the water flowing back out the top. This is where we're looking at problems. If the water's coming out the top, we've got an issue here. Now, again, thinking about the model, it's the onset or increase of mental health symptoms. So I'm not talking diagnosis, I'm not talking psychosis or bipolar, I'm talking feeling flat because you've just had a bad day. I'm talking about feeling anxious because things are just getting on top of you and you don't know what to do and you don't know where to turn. I'm talking about feeling frightened because actually something's happened to you physically and you don't understand what, you don't know what's going on, you might be confused, you might have kind of what I call absences, whereby you're in the middle of something, you're doing something, you're with a group of people, but actually you're not even present because you're so busy up here or so busy scanning other parts of your body to think about what might be going on and what that means, that you kind of you get lost. So those are the things I'm talking about, and I'm sure you guys in this room will have your own story on what it's like to suffer some of those menopausal experiences and symptoms, and I would imagine a lot of those feature here. So when we talk about symptoms, it's physical symptoms as well, because we know that some of the physical symptoms can worsen if we don't pay attention to them. If we ignore them, likely that's going to get worse. If they get worse, our mental state's going to deteriorate and we're going to have more type of mental health symptoms. And obviously the suspiciousness and hearing voices is related to psychosis, but you know, not really relevant to the group, unless of course you were developing a significant mental health problem, and that's where it went. But the model is designed to just really think about, how does this relate to me? If I was to map myself out in this bucket, what would it look like and what would I need to do about it? So this is what a completed bucket looks like. So stress going in, that's all the stress filling the bucket. We've drilled some holes in and we're thinking really consciously about how we cope, whether that's positive or negative. We're really then going to work on how do we bolster some of the positive stuff, how do we do more of that because it's really useful. We're being quite observational and quite sensitive to the things that we do that are unhelpful, and we're mapping those out and we're saying, these are unhelpful, this is why. We'll probably need to think about how we get to a point where we're doing less of those things. We map them out, we identify that, whilst it's all you have at your disposal, it's currently contributing to the problem and it could be making you worse, so it's really important that we do that. And sometimes when we're developing these buckets, because you could argue if we do that bit well, how does that bit happen? Generally what brings you to a service or to a support group is, we're already here, we might not have developed that bit yet. So that's how we work individually with the model, with people, to think about, how does this model represent me and how am I going to use it to get the help that I need. The next slide, you might be able to relate to, you might not, I'll judge it based on your reaction, but this is what I think a menopausal bucket looks like.
Yeah.
And if you notice, I've put that on top of the other stuff that was already in it, so that's in the background because that's life stuff, this is menopause stuff. And I'm probably one of those people, naively, who thought, well, you know, it's just a moment in time, it's a couple of hot flushes, you'll be fine. But I've done some reading and I've done some research and I've had lots of conversations with Catherine, so that's led me to understand it more and actually to realise it can affect lots of women at different points in their life in lots and lots of different ways. And thinking about the mind-body connection, if you've got that going on, then I would suggest that you all, in some way, shape or form, need something more than what's currently being offered. I get a sense from speaking to Catherine and some of the research I've done that the treatments for the symptoms and conditions that you are currently experiencing isn't robust, the funding's not great, it's not as a postcode lottery. It's a little bit like that with mental health services as well, but if you've got the life stuff in the background and then this comes along at some point, you've got problems, haven't you? You need something more.
You're screwed.
Yeah, screwed.
Except you're not because of your dry climate.
That's right. I'm not at all supposed to be trying to
And you're like a Christos, do you?
Well,
That's another story. Sorry, Paul.
No, you're fine. So based on the group then, does this reflect some of your experiences?
Yeah.
Does this mean that the model that I've just gone through with you fits? Yeah? Good. So if you haven't filled it in now, it might be useful to fill it in later, and just sometimes getting it down, it can be really cathartic to just get it all down, acknowledge it and then put it in the drawer, because it's important that we don't lose sight of those things. It's a really effective tool. I use it all the time. It's one of the, I would argue, the simplest thing you can do with someone, but the impact's really huge, and it leads to an increase in awareness, an increase in insight. It enables us to manage our symptoms, and it increases coping, and then that increases resilience, which in turn can reduce vulnerability. So it's a really positive model. So I'm going to move on to interventions, but thinking specifically about some of the psychological techniques that I would use, and I'm hoping that you will participate and maybe practice some of them as we go. So one of the main ones is CBT. There's this huge misconception that CBT is just for people who've got mental health problems, or it can only work on your mind. Cognitive behavioural therapy is one of the models that actually works with that mind-body connection really well. So it is effective for a range of problems, so depression, anxiety disorders, alcohol and drug misuse. People can have as a kind of couple therapy. It can be used for eating disorders and severe mental illness, but it can also be used for chronic and enduring physical health problems. It can be used for pain management. So the model is really versatile and transferable, and you don't have, if you wanted to go down the route of having CBT, you don't have to go with this formulated idea that I've got a mental health problem and I need CBT. You might say, I've got some stuff on my plate and I need to I need to move it around, I need to unravel it, I need to think about it. And I'm told, and I've done some research, that actually CBT is one of those strategies that I think I can really work with, and I think it'll help us just to understand that.
CBT is one of the alternative therapies as well. If you're a lady who want to have HRT, or if a lady wants to have HRT and an alternative therapy, CBT is coming out with one of the other alternative therapies.
Yeah. And there's been lots of emphasis on how we use CBT now, and even in mental health, it's rather than it being a second line therapy for depression, it's first or in conjunction with medication. So it's not go to your GP, get a prescription and leave. There's going to be a real biopsychosocial assessment of need undertaken by the GP, and treatment needs to be tailored to the individual, rather than just given sedatives or antidepressants. So yeah, CBT, the C, obviously cognitive, deals with thoughts and how they affect behaviour. That's the B of the model, and you can't work with one function of CBT in isolation because they all affect each other. And as a human, as a living being, nobody has a thought in isolation, nobody has an emotion in isolation, and nobody has a behaviour that just comes from nowhere. We don't just do something because it just is. The model, CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, works on the premise that there's 5 factors in a particular model which we're going to be working on. The only 2 parts of our selves or well-being that the model can focus on or change, and it's not magical, but it can change your thoughts and your thought processes, and it can change your behaviour. What it can't do is change the trigger or the situation that we find ourselves in, and it can't change our emotional arousal to a thought, a situation or a behaviour. What we learn to do through the process of CBT is to manage that a bit more robustly or reduce the intensity of the emotion. And as a CBT therapist, it works. This model is what I describe as my light bulb model. When I go through this with someone, they facially light up, their eyes become brighter, they are smiling, it's all going in, and they're able to make sense of it. And if you ask them if they've made sense of it and you ask them to tell you what that means, they tell you what all of that means to them and what's currently impacting on their well-being. And they think that's what they've come to you for you to tell them that, but actually that's the secret about therapies, is that actually you already come with all of that intel and all of that knowledge, and it's my job to help you find it. So I love it when I'm with someone and have that light bulb moment, because honestly the room lights up and it's really evident. It's the best bit of the job, I think. CBT is based on the concept that your thoughts, feelings, physical sensations, so what's happening with your body and your actions, are all interconnected. The negative thoughts and the feelings trap us in vicious cycles, and I'm sure at some point in our life, if it's not been menopause related, there has been something we've been stuck with, ruminated on, or we've just found problematic and we've felt stuck. And it can help you deal with overwhelming problems in a positive way by chunking or breaking them down into smaller pieces. You can't come to therapy for one session and think all of your problems are going to be fixed. We need to pick them apart, line them up, pick the one that's the most problematic, and then fix it and move on. And usually that's how it would work for people, and they find that a more robust way of thinking about what's brought them to therapy in the first place. So the 3 basic principles of CBT are that, again, it's a cycle. You can start anywhere you like, because fundamentally if this happens, it's going to lead into other aspects. So dysfunctional assumptions or thoughts are that, so if you think about, core beliefs are the things I mentioned earlier about how things that happen to us in our younger years tend to determine how we think and feel about things now. So core beliefs are informed by childhood experiences. So those core beliefs around world, self and others, you arrive at the point of nailing down your core beliefs through your early experiences. So when you grow into an adult and you mature, the views you have about yourself, the world around you and others around you, they're already predetermined by those life experiences, and they're really difficult to shift. They can be shifted, or if they can't be shifted, they can be worked around to think about the other functions of CBT. Dysfunctional assumptions, so humans tend to hold on to negative more easily than the positive. It's just how we're programmed. It's easy to just accept that we're downtrodden. It's easy to accept that things are just as they are and we're not going to change them, and you've just been dealt a bad hand. It's rubbish, it's absolute rubbish. But that's what we do. Again, sometimes dysfunctional assumptions are, well, I was bullied as a child because I was ugly, I am ugly, or I was bullied as a child because I was just unlikable, because I'm just not a likable person, or I was bullied as a child because I'm horrible. Actually, I'm just a horrible person, and that's why I have to spend my life alone. There are many ways in which assumptions affect how we think or what we believe, and it's the job of the therapist to understand whether what you're saying is based on fact or whether you're just jumping from assumption to assumption to assumption to help you to understand and ratify what you thought in the first place. And CBT helps us unpick some of that and actually leave it so that we don't need it anymore. Again, those automatic negative thoughts, those are specific with depression, those are the things that keep us stuck. And often it's a kind of an exaggerated view of something that's really difficult, something that's really tough, and it's often always bigger than what the problem that's presented itself actually is. So as you see here, the cognitive triad, the notion is thoughts create feelings, feelings create behaviour, behaviour reinforces thoughts, so all of those arrows actually cross over and around. And if you're working with someone in a cognitive model, then you want to work on all of those things ultimately at the same time, which is what that form you've got will demonstrate. So this is a very typical CBT formulation, and it's a situational formulation. So you might have an overarching formulation on a person, well, I say you, me, of someone I'm working with based on what they've brought onto therapy, based on that entirety of their life experiences and who they are as a person. But week on week, someone might come and they've had a bad week, and they say, well, actually this week my mood's dipped. I thought I was improving, but actually I've had a bad week, so my mood's dipped. What we need to do is understand why. So why has your mood dipped? What's happened in the week that might be contributing to that? Or sometimes if they'll say nothing's happened out of the ordinary, or there doesn't appear to be anything that's changed, you can ask them about, well, what have you noticed yourself thinking more about this week? Because sometimes nothing has happened. They've just found themselves ruminating a little bit more, they're not sure why. It could be because work is ramping up and they're a bit more stressed, but they haven't really paid any attention to it. The kids might be a bit more demanding, partner might be working away more, so there's a bit more demand on them. Or they've got a bit more free time and they haven't filled it, and they're just in their head a little bit more than they were the week before that. So the situational context is really, really important, because it could be something or nothing. But regardless of which one it is, it's still contributing and it's still important. So it's thinking about the where, the when, the who were you with, if it's relevant, what happened and how it played out. All of those are really relevant questions. Fundamentally, whatever it is leads us to a process of thinking or thoughts. And what we need to do is map out, so in that situation that you're saying you felt relatively overwhelmed with, you found it quite difficult, you want to spend your whole session on it today, what were you thinking? What was going through your mind? How did you make sense of that? Did you notice that you had a particular thought that led you down a particular avenue or a particular route of exploration? Did you find that you were getting stuck with a particular set of thoughts? Now, with this formulation, for you as a group, and if you wanted to complete it while we're starting, you can, because I think it could be relevant, but just thinking about if you've had a particular influx of symptoms this week, is that relevant to this model? Yeah, I would argue it is. If you're having a bad week because of your menopausal symptoms and all of the other stuff that you've got going on because life is still happening around us, and you're coming for CBT around symptom management or pain management or working through some of that mind-body connection, then arguably yes, it is relevant. So the thoughts that you have in the week that we've just had probably are negative, assumption-based, not based in reality or fact, and are keeping you stuck. So that's what we need to explore, and that's what we'll map out in that section. What we would then do is we'd move into emotions. So how did that feel? And you can globally say, how have you felt over the week? How's your mood? Can you rate that on a scale? 0's the worst you've been, 10's the best you've been. Where are you today? Where have you been consistently over the week? If you've been feeling anxious, how's that different to how you've previously felt anxious? If 0 is you're not anxious and 10 is you're very anxious, where are you currently? What does that look like? How would somebody know? You can go as far as mapping out emotions based on every single thought. So if there's a situation and someone says, I had all of these 10 things go through my mind and I couldn't move away from them, you can map an emotion against every single thought. That's how detailed the model can be, and that's how specifically focused it is. Depending on how engaged it is and how good of a therapist you are and how much you want them to get from the formulation, you could ask them to rate out of 100% conviction in the thought. So how much do you believe that thought? You're saying it's keeping you stuck. How much? How much do you believe it? What can we rate it as? The process of doing that means we can then really focus on the top 3 thoughts in the session, because then you're really keeping it specific and focused, and you can leave some of the other stuff, pay attention to it later if it comes back into the room or into the session. With emotions, you can rate individual emotions on a scale. 0 being, I felt it, but it didn't really bother us, somewhere near a 0. 10 is, I'm majorly overwhelmed and I don't know what I'm going to do and I don't know how I'm going to cope. So high percentages or high ratings are the hot areas that you want to focus on in a session, and you draw them to that in the formulation as we go. Behaviours, so what did you do? You think about that fight or flight. Sometimes people have symptoms and they're absolutely terrified, so they go to bed because that's all they know. And believe it or not, that's really common. If you can avoid it, people do, and people will. And you really have to understand why. What was so terrifying about that? What did you think was going to happen if you faced it head on? What do you think was going to happen if you left the house? What do you think would happen if you went to work? How might you have dealt with what you perceived might have happened? And is some of the behaviour associated with some of those thoughts and assumptions you've made? Hence, you've got to then ignore everybody. Sometimes it's positive behaviours. Someone might say, well, I took a hot bath because actually I know that really works for me, and it helped for about an hour, so I had an hour's reprieve, so that was a positive thing. Somebody else might say, well, I avoided that glass of wine that I would normally have with me dinner because I know once I've had one, I'm likely to want another one, and then I'm going to ruminate and I'm going to feel worse. So it's drawing on all behaviours, helpful and unhelpful. Sometimes the person might tell you what they're doing and they don't know whether it's useful or not. So it's a conversation around what purpose does that behaviour serve to you at that moment in time, and what might you do if that behaviour presented itself next time. So you're trying to get people to think about the sense of control that most of the time they do actually have, but often they don't feel like they've got any, and that's why some behaviours play out the way they do. So that's a really important section. And remember, it's only this bit of the model and this bit of the model that can change. Those are the change agents. The other stuff's going to happen anyway, so we just have to map it out and understand it. The next bit is really important, and it's the bodily or physical sensations. So in general mental health terms, if you're low in mood, if you're anxious, you're going to have increased heart rate, you're going to have sweaty palms, sweaty other body parts, you might feel that you're having a heart attack, you might notice that your stomach's in knots, you might anxious toilet, and that's both toilet behaviours. It might be that you notice that you get flushed or hot, and that can be usually associated with anxiety. You might feel weak or shaky, you might feel fatigued and just physically drained and exhausted. It's all relevant, it's all really relevant. The amount of people I sit with and say, didn't notice anything. No, there was nothing, there was absolutely nothing. And then you have to really work with them about understanding that function and what function that's serving. So if we think about fight or flight, often your body's already telling you there's a threat before your head's got there. And if you don't understand your body and you don't pay attention to it, you're missing the first warning. If you miss the first warning and you move into the cognitive element, then you've missed a part of action that you could have taken, which might have mitigated the situation from getting any worse in the first instance. So thinking about bodily functions and focusing on those sensations is really powerful. Now, I'm going to make an assumption that you guys don't need to focus on it too much because you're hammered on an hourly or a day-to-day basis with symptoms related to that menopausal picture. Now, just because you're focusing on it doesn't mean that that's a negative thing, doesn't mean that means you're neurotic, it doesn't mean that you're overplaying your symptoms. What it means is right here, right now, it's really significant to you guys and it's really keeping you stuck. You're noticing it because your body's telling you something, your body's not happy, your body wants you to know you're facing a threat and it doesn't know how to help you. So that's why that part of the model is really important. And for any physical health condition where you're going for psychological therapy, you could argue, well, we can ignore that bit because that's what's brought them. We know that it's well formulated. That's all they talk about. But you've got to talk about it to understand it. You've got to talk about it to map it against some of the other symptoms. You've also got to talk about it to understand why it's relevant now. Why is it that bodily function? Why is it that bodily sensation? And why is it always that one first? Why is it always that one you notice? Because sometimes people might notice the third bodily sensation and miss the first two, and it's because of the sense of threat or what that might mean for them. They might have a particular view about a particular sensation that comes from childhood, and if we think about adverse childhoods, some of the physical sensations can be really, really traumatizing for people. So you've really got to understand what makes the person tick, what they've brought along. I always describe it as you've got this backpack on, and every day we're living this life and we're just pulling stuff in that backpack, and we just trudge on day after day carrying that backpack. And I would wonder how many people have been given the opportunity of a sit-down conversation with somebody who said, let's get that backpack on the floor, let's open the zip and let's look what's inside, and let's consider whether all of the things you carry around with you need to be in there. Do you need all of that stuff today, or do you just need a little bit of it? Can we leave some of it at home and just focus on the bits that you need? Bit of a cringy analogy, but it's powerful. You know, most people would get the backpack or the handbag analogy. And it's just getting people to think about and externalising some part of what we've got going on, rather than it just always being wholly consuming in our body or in our mind. Does that make sense to people? Mm-hmm. Does it seem relevant and like you could use it to map out your own formulation, to understand your own situation? Good. It's really closely linked to the stress vulnerability model, but it's a bit more specific in the thought content and the physiology and the behaviours. And because of the way the model works, essentially if you think about these lines, there's an arrow on the end, so every single bit of the model relates to every other bit of the model all of the time. You can't do one bit of it and get somebody well. You've got to work on all of it all of the time, and that's how it's useful, and that's why it's really powerful. So another strategy is mindfulness, and I know I put a post on the group about mindfulness. Mindfulness essentially means maintaining a moment-by-moment awareness of our thoughts, feelings, body sensations, surrounding environment, through gentle and kind of nurturing lens. Now, I'm a total hypocrite because I'm a total stress head, and today has been one of those days where I haven't been mindful at all. I've been mindful of the idiots that I've had to deal with and the stress that I've endured, and I've been mindful of all of the things going on around us that's not my fault, but I haven't been mindful about me and about what I'm projecting out towards others or into the environment. I haven't been mindful to enjoy the good bits of my day until I was driving here tonight, and it's mostly country roads, so that was really lovely, and thinking about, you know, driving with the window open, the breeze coming in, the colours of the trees, the noises that we experience, like I saw horses on the way, sheep on the way, cows on the way. So on the way here I made up for it. I've been a bit more mindful. A positive mental state is achieved by focusing one's awareness on the present moment while calmly acknowledging and accepting one's feelings, thoughts and bodily sensations, and we use that as a therapeutic technique. So actually I was mindful because I acknowledged it, didn't I? I knew today was a bad day and I knew all those things were going on, I just didn't feel like I could do anything about it. So it's thinking about how do we maintain that. So I might do it in bits, but I don't do it routinely enough to say that I'm able to maintain it. But when I do mindfulness techniques, and I do use them, and I do use them to rate sleep, and I use it to rate sleep when I'm stressed. So for me, there's always a particular pattern that I would follow until I get to a point where I'm like, right, I need to do something here. This is how I need to maintain and take responsibility for my wellness and what's going on. I can't always influence all of that stuff that's going on around me. I can only influence me. So whether you use it all of the time or intermittently, if you use it, it will work. When I do use it with people, I get a really mixed bag of results, and that's just because of where you are at that moment in time. Are you in a state of being mindful? Did you feel like you could contribute? Did you feel like within a group you felt comfortable to do it? I hear so many times, oh, don't talk to me about mindfulness, it's not for me, it doesn't work. Like, I don't know why you talk about it because it's rubbish. I tried it once Oh, there you go then. You know, you're an expert, you've tried it once, it's never going to work for you. So my view on anything, if someone says this is a strategy and it's going to work for you, you've got to try it and try it and try it. Nothing works first time round. If it does, you're lucky. So when we try it later, don't expect magical things to happen, but if you get something from it, then that's just the first step of the foundation of what mindfulness is about. And also, I haven't got the most therapeutic voice, so I find it a bit drony, which is why I tend not to use it too much in my own practice. If I can, I stick a recording on with someone who's got a lovely voice. But I'm going to use my own tonight. So ultimately, that's kind of mindfulness where it fits. Benefits are things like self-control. I lack that massively, which you've probably already realised. It can create a sense of objectivity. It can affect your tolerance. I have terrible tolerance as well. It can mean that you can be more flexible. I was Catherine's manager, she'll tell you.
I know. It must be a healthcare thing.
You did, you're right. Calmness and composure, improved concentration, it definitely does. Mental clarity, it's great for that. Emotional intelligence, I'm going to own that because actually I think I am really emotionally intelligent and I know where all of my flaws lie and how good I am at things and how bad I am at things. And also thinking of ourselves with kindness, just giving ourselves a break, just be nice to yourself, because let's face it, not many other people take the baton, and you know it's difficult to find people within your life who are really going to hold you and say, there, it's okay. It's not really the world we live in these days, so we need to take some responsibility for that. Again, acceptance and self-compassion is really important, and you will get that from mindfulness if you practice it. Is mindful menopause a thing? Is it achievable? I'm going to let you decide that, and if you want to feed back to me in a couple of weeks after you've practiced more, you can. The literature though argues that it is. There is literature out there, it's evidence-based. There's a book I've recommended. That book the author has its own Facebook group, which is just a page that you would like. So there'll be positive content on there. I'm sure you can share the content in your own group. Essentially though, the idea about menopause being mindful is that it's going to help you integrate your emotions. And I'm not just talking your everyday emotions, I'm talking your wild, uncontrollable emotions you have when you're in the midst of a flush or a host of menopausal symptoms. Hopefully it's going to integrate that. Hopefully you can be accepting and compassionate with yourself and understand why that's just how it is today. It does reduce anxiety, whether you know you're having an onset of menopausal symptoms or whether you're just generally lower level anxious in your day to day. It can relieve pain. It can really relieve pain. The mindfulness activity we're going to do today is a part mindfulness but part body scan. Now that can go both ways. It can open the floodgates for symptoms, but it can also really focus in and tone them down. If it does both, that's still effective because we've got to understand what's coming in to be able to let it go and move it through. It can really calm the body. Sometimes when I do body scans with people, and you say to people, all right, kind of relax yourself, to just be present, and when you're ready to open your eyes, everyone I do it with is like, oh no, I don't want to, can I just have another 10 minutes? Because it's really calming and it's really relaxing. So I'm hoping you'll get a sense of that tonight. And again, it decreases stress. It does. When I use it, I can really feel calm and de-stress. And if I de-stress, I sleep better. And I'm hoping that you feel some of that as you practice. So the 3 steps of mindfulness are, you have to step out of autopilot, and that's the just doing the do and just getting on with it. Try to find a quiet space, gently close your eyes and take a pause. The amount of times I tell myself, I haven't got time, I literally haven't got time today to be mindful. Total lie, I'm just not prioritising it. Sometimes you only need 60 seconds. That's how quickly you can be mindful and get the benefits. The second step is becoming aware of your breath. So really focusing in on your breath. If you're stressed and if you're anxious, you're already laboured, you're already working harder physically, mentally and emotionally than you need to be. If we can regulate that, you're going to calm, you're going to feel like you're just getting a bit of control back. And if you expand your awareness outwards, so you're not just in your head, in the office, in the home, and you're thinking about everything else that's out there, the things that contribute to wellness and a positive state, you can really focus in a meaningful way. And for me, that was the drive here, and all of those things that I mentioned that I drew on. The little narrative, the little picture there that's the NHS kind of logo for, mindfulness. So this one is mindful, as in you're constantly focused on what's going through your mind, or are you mindful? And most people would say day in, day out, I'm there. It would be nice to be there, but I don't know how to get there. And fundamentally, it's just through practice. So hopefully we're going to practice some mindfulness if I can get the tech to work. What I've done is it's a YouTube video that we're not going to watch. I just want the sound from it, just to kind of, you know, bring the ambulance down. We'll move back to the slide. Okay. There's an advert on, so I'm just going to wait the advert out. Sorry, that's an other advert. I didn't ask for that.
Yeah. Yes, it says, I named that tune as well. I named that tune on yours today, I named that tune as well. The one with the empty head,
Right.
needs to be the one with the full head sometimes.
So if you want to just get yourselves comfortable, get yourself in a comfortable position, try and sit so that you're sat in a position whereby you're really sitting into the seat, you're not slouched, you've got both feet on the floor. And if you're comfortable to do so, when you're feeling comfortable, just close your eyes. And what I want you to do firstly is just to think about how things have been for you at the moment, think about all of the things that you're facing on a day-to-day basis, and just to know that they are there. Think about the symptoms and think about the need for the support group. Just notice any themes, any thoughts, any beliefs or assumptions you've made, any emotions that you might be having, any physical sensations, and that could be, you know, symptoms or particular pains or tensions, and also notice the place in the body in which you're feeling that. And we're just going to acknowledge and accept that just for a little while. So now that you're sat in a comfortable and relaxed position, what I want you to do is focus in on your body. I want you to notice how you're sitting in the chair, what that feels like, where you are feeling the chair that you're sat on. You know, that might be in your back or in your bottom or on your legs. I want you to feel where the weight feels like it's distributed, whether that's wholly on the chair or whether there's some weight going through your legs and out your feet onto the floor. And I want you to just take a few deep breaths in, hold them, and then a slow exhale. And now what we're going to do is we're going to move our attention slowly through each part of our body, and we're going to start at the feet. And what I want you to do is focus all of your attention onto your feet. Think specifically about the role and function of our feet. Think about how they are currently feeling. think about the footwear that we have on, whether we are comfortable in our feet, whether they are really telling us a story about the day that we've had, whether there's any particular aches, pains or tension. And I want you to just notice that and just accept that that's there. Then we're going to move up into your lower leg, and again just notice any sensations, any tension, any particular feelings you're feeling on the inside but also on the outside, if that's contact with clothing or the chair that you sat on, and just be mindful of that and just accept that that's how things feel at the moment. Then we're going to move on, so above the knee, up to the hip area, including the bottom. Again, just think about focusing all of our attention into that area. How does that feel? What are we noticing? Are there any messages in what we're noticing and how we're feeling? Are we noticing any particular pains or tensions, any tingling or sensations? Acknowledge that and just again allow that to be present. Now we're going to move up into the torso, and that is our stomach, our chest and our back area. And again, draw all of your focus and attention to that area. Think about what's happening there right now for you. Notice any areas of discomfort or comfort. Think about the clothes that we're wearing. Are they comfortable? Are they uncomfortable? Think about any internal sensations or even movements that we might be noticing right now, any noises that they might be making internally, any gurgling or gushing type sounds that you might be able to hear when you're really focusing in, and just acknowledge that and accept it and just sit with that for a while. It's okay while you are thinking about those things, whether your attention wanders off into other things, if you get distracted by other noises or sensations, either within your body or externally to what's happening right now. Just gently try and bring your focus back to the area that we're currently sat with. We're now going to move up into the neck and shoulder area, and we're going to really focus in on how that feels. We're going to notice whether we feel any tension there and where specifically that tension is. We're going to focus on whether we notice and pay any attention to the weight of our head and how much structure that our neck and shoulders bear and what the relevance of that is. Again, acknowledging any of those sensations and tensions, just allowing them to be present and just sitting with that. Now we're going to move up into our head and face, and again being really mindful around any sensations that we might be feeling. One of the things that's noticeable is temperature. So what is it about your current temperature? What do you notice about that? Any noises that you might be hearing kind of whirring around, any particular sensations that you might be having. Are you feeling any particular comfort or discomfort within your head and your face? Again, just paying attention to that and just allowing that to be present. Then from there we're going to move down into the arms. And again, just notice the position that your arms are currently in. Notice what your hands are doing currently and how you have them positioned, either how you're holding them or how you have them positioned on your leg. Notice any particular sensations, aches, pains, or again, temperature on that part of your body. Acknowledge and accept and just allow that to be present. And now what I want to do is bring focus to your body in its entirety. So don't focus on one specific bit, focus on the entire self and just notice all of the things that you've been noticing, and thinking about any sensations that you might be having, any tensions, and again acknowledging and accepting that and just allowing that to be present. And then if we can just focus on our breathing, taking in a few deep breaths, holding that and then just gently exhaling. And when you're ready, open your eyes. Okay, so how was that for everybody? Nice. Yeah, good. People think if they fall asleep they've done it wrong. Actually you haven't. That just kind of brings testament to the state that you can bring to yourself, and that's really important. You might miss some of the fundamentals of noticing sensations and allowing them to be present, but just knowing that you have the ability to think in a really calming way and bring about a restful sensation or period of rest actually is probably a bonus. And one of the nice things about mindfulness, generally if I participate in mindfulness, it's my final activity before sleep, and I will fall asleep mid mindfulness exercise, and that's predominantly why I use it and why I find it effective. Does this feel like something you could apply to yourselves? Yeah? One of the best ways to apply it is to either download an app or use YouTube. My go-to is to always find free content. YouTube have some amazing ones. Lots of the free content includes music, like what's playing in the background. It can be kind of panpipes, it can be rustling trees, it can be the sea crashing, it can be animal noises, birds, like animal noises of the sea. The one that I find works for me, that I find really therapeutic, and that's probably because my most mindful place is the beach and the sea. And my kids will say, "Dad, something weird happens to you when we go to the beach. You just go somewhere and it's really hard to get your attention. What's that about?" And they're older now, so they really get when I'm like just zoning out. I hadn't really realised just how impactful that was for me until I started kind of working in mental health services and learning different therapeutic techniques. But for me, my place is the beach, and that's my haven and that's my safe space. And if I'm stressed, and I mean really stressed, that's probably where you're going to find me. I find more pleasure in it if I go alone as well, because then I'm not distracted by anybody or having to make anybody else feel better or hold a conversation. I'm just there, I'm just being, and that's in whatever form that takes. So my go-to noises or sounds would be waves, not whales, because the screeching of a whale I find very common. So just the sea. And if I can find one with a crackle of a campfire on the beach with the crashing waves in the background, perfect. And they do exist because I found them on YouTube. So for me, I have a few saved that I use, and you will only know how powerful mindfulness can be for you if you practice it. You will only know what noises and sounds you really vibe from if you practice it in different ways and different forms using different techniques. And again, for me, my go-to one is breathing and body scan with that kind of that music in the background. really effective. I shy away from it in practice though, because I think I'm a bit of a drony voice. So I tend not to share it with people.
You had a lovely voice.
I was trying hard, I was really trying hard.
I use an Alexa. I bought an Alexa for beside the bed, so I don't
Yes.
take my phone upstairs to bed, because
Yeah.
otherwise you wake up and you start scrolling. So I'm just, Alexa, play me something to help you go to sleep.
Yeah, useful, isn't it? Yeah. If I use YouTube, you can't lock your phone when you're using free content on YouTube. So I just turn the phone over so it doesn't light the room up, and I'm not distracted by it. But no, mindfulness is great, and it works for most states of mind, most afflictions, whatever you've got going on, whatever's stressing you out, it can be really useful. Has anybody heard of emotional freedom techniques? So this is not specifically a psychological technique. It's grounded in psychology, but it's more of an alternative technique. It is something I'm trained in, although I'm not accredited in. It's a really good technique. It very, very much is about the mind-body connection. There is not another therapy that could argue that it's more mind-body connection. Has anybody heard of tapping? That's this. So it's formerly tapping or psychological acupressure. It's now emotional freedom techniques, and that's what it's ratified as. People who use the technique believe that tapping the body can create a balance in your own energy system. So the idea of tapping is we tap in a sequence on particular body parts, and for each body part, that body part is linked to a specific organ. Our body is designed to filter, and often what we do is we pick up and we trap toxins in our physical state, and sometimes we hold on to them. One of the classic things around holding on to things is the good old bacterial infection or deep gut bacterial infections that we all have, that sometimes just don't bother us, but sometimes can bother us and can then lead to a whole host of other physical health conditions. This is one of the techniques that would argue it can move that energy and those toxins around your body to dispel them. It works. It really works. So, yeah, identifying blockages and releasing them. So the setup phase of EFT is what I've just done with you. So notice, pay attention, what does it feel like, what's going on for you, acknowledge it, sit with it, move into a mindful body scan, and then move into an EFT sequence. We always start this session in EFT with an affirmation, so something really positive, something that you believe about yourself or about your problem or about your knowledge, skills, experience, attributes, all of those things and qualities that you have that you negate because you're just feeling blur. Bring those into the room, own them, shout about them, put your positive affirmation out of the atmosphere, and then move through tapping. Fundamentally, that's how it works. As a diagram, the tapping points are top of the head, which feels really stupid when you're doing it. Eyebrow, so here, you can either tap with one hand or with two, depends how you feel or how stupid you want to look. It's the side of the eye, under the nose, on your chin, collarbone and breast. There is two ways to use it. You as the practitioner can tap somebody else. You need consent because you put your hands on somebody. Now it's become less invasive and it's designed to get people to tap themselves. So that's oh, and then there's the karate chop. So this bit here. What I should have done in preparation for today was think about which of these are linked to which organs, and I didn't put it in the presentation and I can't remember them. Maybe that's something to bring back. So that's it in essence. Thinking about how it works with our physical health, when you're training in this technique, you have to use the technique and you have to share your skills with other learners to become accustomed to the techniques and how you would orientate a session. One of the beauties of the technique is it has borrowed benefits. So if I was to offer you a tapping session working on your problems, I've probably got my own, and it might be emotional, it might be mental health, it might be physical. So if I tap through in sequence to your problems to get you to mirror me, to work on your problems, I'm managing my own well-being, and I get bold benefits from that tapping, because you don't always have to be in your head to know that you're getting benefit from doing something. If I'm tapping my energy and pressure points and flushing toxins, well, those toxins are going to focus on what my body's telling it to do. So I'm really greedy. And if someone says, oh, do you want to swap some EFT? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Because I'm going to know for a fact that my back's going to alleviate. And I've swapped tapping on a Friday at 4 o'clock when I've probably got 100 other jobs I could be doing to make sure that I can leave work on time. And I go into an EFT session, berating myself, telling myself it was a stupid idea, I'm never going to get finished work on time. And through the process, realise, actually, it's not just my back that's hurting, I'm really stressed, I'm physically tired, my feet are absolutely killing, and I can't wait to get out and take my shoes off. Half an hour, 40 minutes of tapping, and I'm springing out of my chair, forgetting all the things that I need to do, I'm logging off and I'm going home, and I feel really good, because I've been able to put it in boxes, I've been able to think about it. Is it important? Do I need to worry about it now? Does it need my attention now? Will anybody die as a consequence? And will it still be there on Monday for me to pick up when I come back? Of course it will. So that's how sometimes using EFT to reframe what we perceive as problems, or the backpack analogy, take your backpack off for a bit, try a bit of EFT and see how that feels. Put it back on when you're ready. So it's not new, it's very used in America, as you can imagine. There isn't a lot you can draw on from a YouTube point of view if you want to learn and see it in action. There's not a great deal. The science around it is emergent, and there is some ratified research papers out there that is now starting to look at the benefits of this as a strategy in its own right, and it's rivaling, or it's trying to rival the research on EMDR as an approach, and a lot of the methods within this overlap with mindfulness and overlap with EMDR. So there's definite growth there with that.
What's EMDR?
Eye movement desensitization reprocessing.
Yeah.
So you just really talked yourself into coming back to another session?
Well, so if we think about emotional freedom techniques and let's practice, I know that we haven't got time, so I'm basically going to say it's to be continued. If you want us to come back, I will. I can't say that I'm an expert on it, but if we use what we've learned today, thinking about more mindfulness next time, and then just moving into a tapping phase, hopefully you will get enough out of it to be able to think, I could go off and try that, and maybe think about using that on my own. Because being mindful and closing your eyes can be embarrassing for somebody, but tapping in a group can be embarrassing as well. But if you want us to come back, I'll come back, and we'll just do whatever you're comfortable with. And the results will be varied because it depends on where that takes you and what you've brought on the day. If that's okay. Yeah.
Brilliant.
So just think about books and resources. I can't say I've read those two books because I didn't have time, but what I did was I did a kind of a look at what the literature is. I read some of the reviews around it. Because I'm a cognitive behavioural therapist, you can't go wrong with a workbook. If there's a book working with cognitive models and it's telling you what to do, it's got to do what it says on the front, hasn't it? So my advice would be, try some of the techniques, try and fill in some of the work pages, and that's one of the reasons I try to make this interactive. Thinking about filling in your own bucket, doing your own 5 areas, practicing a little bit of mindfulness. You don't need me standing here telling you what's going to work. You need to know what's going to work. You need to practice it and understand it and see whether it applies. So you won't use a workbook cover to cover. You'll pick bits of this and bits of that. The Mindful Menopause, again, is very focused on kind of mindfulness-based practice, but it's very individual. So what your mindful menopause might look like might be very different to yours. And just thinking about how we use those skills to learn about ourselves, to understand what our body's trying to tell us, and thinking about how do I take some control back here? Because let's face it, you're not really being helped with this, are you? It's a bit like being a parent. You've got a kid, that's it, crack on. And it just, life has a way of doing that to us. This here, the Tapping Solutions, is an app. The Tapping Solutions is an industry in its own right. It's a family business. There is some free content on there, and it's worth a download because actually it's a guided mindfulness, tapping technique. So they'll tap you through stress, they'll tap you through physical sensations, they'll tap you through pain. You just click on the content that you want to tap on, plug your headphones in and tap away. Really useful. You can tap in quite a mindful way. So if you tap outdoors in somewhere that's like a nice surrounding, even if it's your garden, if you find your garden quite a peaceful place, tapping outdoors can be really nice. Just make sure your neighbours can't see you. Obviously Calm, Headspace are well-known apps. A lot of the content on there is paid for, but there is still some free taster type stuff in it. If it's on your phone, it's accessible with a tap. So I haven't got time, I don't know where to find it, I don't know what to look for, it's a tap away, you've got no excuse. This one here is a free mindfulness app, and there's lots of free content on there as well, and that's one of the ones that I use quite a bit. Thank you. Any questions?